Hello, and welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we'll look back on the movies, TV, games, people, and phenomena that we still love talking about all these years later, and ask ourselves why these bits of pop culture still enchant us today. This week, we'll be revisiting... What a horrible night to have a podcast schedule, because if you're listening to this and you're one of our regular listeners, you're probably wondering, hey, I was promised an episode on Terminator 2. Don't worry, it's coming. We had to reshuffle things, and the whole schedule I've been talking about for a while is completely honked. But that's okay, because we're here to talk about a game we had also had kind of in the works too. So we just pulled a quick audible here. So today we're talking about Simon's Quest, Castlevania 2 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, released in Japan in 1987 and the US in 1988. It is, of course, a sequel to the original Castlevania. It's a series that's near and dear to my heart because I love horror stuff, and this was kind of the premier horror game series for a while. We'll get into all of that and kind of the ins and outs of this very weird entry in the series, but a highly influential one. So to help me do it, he is one of our regulars. Of course, you know him from many past episodes. He is a performer at Westside Comedy Theater here in Los Angeles, and he teaches improv courses if you want to know how to do that stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast, Rich Baker.
Thank you. I got my flame whip, and I got a bunch of different colored crystals.
of equally valuable usage, we'll find out.
Right.
So, Rich, this was one on a list of things that you had, floated talking about. Tell me about your love for this game and probably, I guess, the old school Castlevania series in general.
Yeah, so this was an example of a game where I played the second one before I played the first one, because my parents got me my Nintendo, I think within a month of this game coming out, and the Nintendo Power issue, the famous, voted worst cover, second issue had just come out. And so I was like, oh, this magazine is all about Castlevania 2, so I want to buy it. So that was I got to have 3 games, so that was one of them. And I just remember, if it wasn't for the Nintendo Power, I would have thrown that game into the river. It is so not intuitive at all. And I'm not a huge fan of those kind of games. But the Nintendo Power issue had everything laid out, so you could literally just walk through the whole thing. So it was the first game that I beat on Nintendo because Nintendo Power walked me through it.
Well, you mentioned Nintendo Power. Definitely, I had a subscription to that when I was a kid. I have very fond memories of looking through it because it was a fun magazine to read. Because yes, it was a promo piece for all of these games, but it had all kinds of other fun features in it. We could probably do an episode just on Nintendo Powers. If you ever can come across one in the wild, they're really neat as magazines go. But you're talking about this famous cover because this was the second issue of the magazine. The first one was released as a promo for Super Mario Brothers 2. And this one, that one was a claymation looking version of Mario jumping with a mushroom or something. It was very tame. This was the main character, Simon Belmont, vampire hunter, hoisting the severed head of Dracula, looking really fucking metal. It was really cool. There's a lot of metal kind of imagery in this series, but you're right, that was very evocative. I don't know if that was my first exposure to it. I remember my first cousins had Castlevania 1, and I remember going over there to play that, and Castlevania 1, and we'll get into the differences, but it's a very different style of game. It's exceedingly difficult for very different reasons than this game is difficult. Yeah. And I remember playing, but I felt like everybody I knew had Simon's Quest. And because of that, the popularity of the first one. So everyone got Simon's Quest, and I guess we should get into it now. Castlevania 1 is a very straight putt as a game. You basically, there's no story. You are Simon Belmont. you hunt vampires, go kill Dracula, go from left to right through this obstacle course, kill the fiends that you encounter with your whip and various other weapons, get to the end, kill Dracula, credits.
Yeah.
Right? That's the game. This game takes that sort of same movement and combat engine and completely changes around the nature of what the gameplay loop is.
Yeah.
And the challenge in Simon's Quest is not the combat. It's the opposite. Like the challenge in usual Castlevania games, it's like, how do I, navigate or traverse this area while all of these different things are harrying me? Yeah. And, falling to my death. And it's exceedingly, again, the margins for error are very small. And in Simon's Quest, that's not so much the problem. The enemies are fairly easy. You upgrade over time. They actually get easier as you go.
Yeah.
The challenge is figuring out, what am I supposed to do? Exactly.
Right. And it's one of those where, you can go left or right. You start in a town. But, some of the townspeople give you information that helps you. Some of them give you complete gibberish. And then there's even some that lie to you. And so it's like, if you're just, I don't have anything but this game and my wits, unless you're an extremely fastidious, try and fail experimenter, like, you're not going to figure this game out.
Yeah, exactly. There's some puzzles in here where the leap of logic you have to make is extremely unintuitive. And it's compounded by the fact that some of the difficulty in sussing this stuff out is unintentional because of the way the game was translated from Japanese to English. A few of those things actually make a little more sense in the original Japanese. Yeah. So, for example, famously, there's this spot in the game where to proceed, you basically, you walk, you're following one of these paths. And you get to just a vertical cliff face, right? Yeah. You can't go any farther. What you are supposed to do is kneel at this cliff face, and eventually, after a few seconds of kneeling with it, if you have the necessary crystal, a tornado will come, pick you up, and take you to the next area of the game that you need to get to.
Yeah, so random.
Well, it feels random. There is a villager who gives you a clue about kneeling and something about a soul. Right, I forget the exact text of it, but in the Japanese version, it's not soul. The Japanese word is whirlwind, or something. There's a couple of points like this in the game where like it's even harder just because somebody's translation was just a little subpar.
Yeah. And if you want to get into like the stuff like that, like there's tiles in the floor that some of them are just like you fall through, but like there is no warning on which one. That is straight trial and error, that kind of stuff.
Yes. So maybe we should, before we even get to some of the
I don't want to. Yeah, where do we want to start?
Yeah, we should start at kind of at what the basic loop of this game is. So this is the one of the first games in what would come to be known as a genre called Metroidvania. And that is a portmanteau of Metroid and Castlevania, largely because of this game and one of its successors that followed this format. A Metroidvania, for people who don't know, is a video game where the structure of it is basically a labyrinth. It's instead of a Mario level where it's just an obstacle course that you run left to right and complete a level, here it's one large interconnected world that you navigate through. And there are sort of tributaries and branching paths that go off of this. And in a Metroidvania, you will, by exploring these paths, you'll eventually unlock some sort of ability that allows you to make your way down one of these other paths and past some previously impassable obstacle. So a classic one would be you're walking through a path and you see that there's a ledge up there that you cannot jump high enough to reach. And at some point you will get an upgrade to your jump that will allow you to jump high enough to reach it, and now you can explore whatever goes down that path, right? Yeah. And that all comes back to the original Metroid for NES and this game, which uses that similar structure.
Yeah. And the story behind the game, which is, going back to the first Castlevania, he destroys Dracula, right? And in this game, I think it's 7 years later, the idea that, he destroyed Dracula, but Dracula's cursed the land. And so the only way to defile the curse is to gather all Dracula's body parts and burn them, and then the curse can be lifted.
Right. So you were exploring this world, making your way from between towns and the wilderness in between, And then there are 5 mansions that these kind of haunted mansion areas. You go inside them, you explore them, and eventually you will find one of these body parts that also have a functional use actually within the game. Although really one of them's useful, the rest are not. But you find them, and then again, it's a challenge to figure out, how do I get to these places? Where even are they? Right? Yeah. It's extremely disorienting to play this game in a way, and I think that's the fun. Like that's really what makes the intended experience so great, is that feeling of like I'm lost in a scary place and I don't know where to go. Like that, even when the gameplay is like not singing, that mood that it sets is so great.
Yeah. And we can't talk about the mood in this game without talking about what I think is the best feature. You probably agree with me, at least up there, is the music.
Yes and no. I think that, all of the tracks in the soundtrack by composer Kenichi Matsuraba, to credit him, the tracks all slap. My only gripe is that there's not enough of them.
Yeah.
There's only like 9 songs on the soundtrack, and they're all really short loops. So they're great, but you're going to hear a lot of them. Castlevania soundtracks, by and large, are always really good. I think the sequel, Castlevania 3, is probably the top of the pops for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But they're all wonderful. But you're right, and you'll be hearing bits of that soundtrack here and there throughout this episode. Probably the most famous track off of it is one called "Bloody Tears."
Bloody Tears.
That track has been used in almost every subsequent Castlevania game. They try and put that leitmotif in somewhere.
And it's been covered by so many metal bands.
Yeah, it's great. Well, also the title is Bloody Tears. I mean, come on, it's just sitting right out there for any metal band to pick up. But the soundtrack serves another function, which it feeds into another part of the gameplay loop that's unique, is this day-night cycle throughout the game.
So you start out in the game in the daytime, and without warning, all of a sudden a text screen pops up. Everything's frozen, and it says, "What a horrible night for a curse." Everything goes dark, the enemies are stronger, the towns are basically shut down, you can't do anything in them, and you've got to wait it out until it becomes daytime again, and it does this over constantly unless you're in a mansion, which it freezes that cycle, I believe.
Right, no time passes on the clock while you're inside one of these, but it does a lot. There's a few things it does. One, it changes up the gameplay in a really neat way. As you sort of mentioned, the enemies get stronger. They're not dropping as many hearts, which are the currency of the game. So, and the towns, which are normally for respite, are now full of monsters too. And the day-night cycle works where I believe it's a quote-unquote 24-hour cycle, but really it's 12 minutes of daylight and 12 minutes of darkness. And it alternates between those things, and it serves a secondary function, which is the speed at which you complete the game dictates which ending you get. So if you manage to do all of this within 8 days in game clock time, you get the best ending. But I just love that it was such a neat idea. There's even like puzzles, and there are certain things things you can do at nighttime that you can't during the daytime, and vice versa. And so you have to make sure you're in the right place during the right part of the day to make progress.
Yeah. And a lot of times at night, at least I remember, just like I felt like I was treading water until daytime so I could go buy something or something like that.
Oh, for sure. There are definitely times where I'm like, there's no enemies on the screen. I can just hunker down here and just wait 5 minutes for it to turn to daylight, and then I can go do what I need to do in a much easier setting. So the other thing that's kind of unique to or not unique to Castlevania, but kind of a hallmark of it, is so many games in the NES were about traversal, right? That was the whole thing of I've got a little guy. How do I get my guy from here to there? And so like Mario, for example, you can very fine tune his jumping, right? You can change direction in midair. You can sort of, depending on how hard you hit the button, controls how high you go. And Simon Belmont is not. Like, he has a specific parabola, and you once you jump, you commit to that arc, just like in real life. Once you start going, physics will take you the rest of the way. And so his movements are much more deliberate and kind of, for lack of a better word, stodgy. And that really, kind of goes with this kind of tense gameplay of like, you're not nimble against these threats.
Yeah, in Super Castlevania 4, they would make him a lot more, like his jumping and his whip would go all over the place. But in this, replaying this game and the first one, it almost feels like this character is heavier, is more dense because he just can't go as high.
Yeah, he can't jump very high, and like one of the biggest hazards that you will encounter in this game are pits that are like 2 tiles wide. Because you just have to make sure if you don't take off at just the right time, you're going right into that pit.
Yeah, not a lot of room for error on those.
Yeah, no. And then you mentioned those areas where there's tiles that are invisible, right? They look like it should be the floor, and you fall right through them. Early on in the game, you can buy a holy water, which you throw a couple of feet in front of you, and that becomes like you're constantly throwing that. Because you're like, I'm not going to fall through that, am I? Because the bottle of holy water will go through if it's safe. So that, or you watch like an enemy will walk up to the edge of it and then walk away, and that's your clue. That like, oh yeah, I'll fall there. But most of the time, you're right. It's just trial and error. You just plummet. And you go, all right, I got to go back up all these stairs again.
Yeah. The thing about dying in the game, which really sucked, is that you lost all your hearts every time you died, and that could be really frustrating.
Well, I thought about that. It's not, to me, that wasn't that bad because the only tax on that is your time in grinding those hearts again. But you lost none of your progress, right? You can die 3 times and then you hit continue, and you're literally like right next to that ledge where you fell to death or the enemy that killed you, which actually felt really great. I'm like, oh, good, I can screw up and I can kind of just try again, Groundhog Day style, and just get past this thing again. As opposed to, say, other Castlevania games where it's like if you died, like you got to go all the way back to the beginning of this level, and if you die enough times and you lose all your continues, game over.
That and that was one thing that I still think that's a great thing about this. And modern day games, like they all pretty much are always like that's just standard, right? You die, you respawn, you die, that kind of thing. This was pretty groundbreaking back then, and it's one of the reasons why it's one of the only games back in those days that I could actually beat.
Yeah, because you kept, you could sort of brute force your way through things, and you kept making this incremental forward progress, which is going back to the thing I said at the beginning. The biggest challenge in the game is where am I supposed to go and how do I get through it? So you mentioned the crystal guy. The first, like when you start the game, there's a guy standing right in front of you who tells you should go buy a white crystal, and you buy it. If you equip that crystal when you're in the mansion, what looks like an impossible jump that you can't make is suddenly made easier because the white crystal reveals this platform that was invisible. And now you can jump on that and get where you need to go. And that kind of puzzle is there throughout the game, in addition to some of these other really obtuse ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when you get through with a mansion and the body part's right there, you think, I'm just going to touch it. I'm going to jump on it, and then I get it, and then that does nothing. And you're like, I have to throw a wooden stake at this circle. Okay, cool. And I only get one shot at it,
Yeah, you just stand right next to it. That's the cheat code.
No, I mean, yeah, but I'm saying if you didn't know, and you're just like throwing everything at it, you're like, okay, I'm supposed to do this particular thing.
Yeah, you have to go back and buy another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's the key you need to basically unlock the body part of Dracula that you need. And then there's these villages that all kind of have their own, in terms of their aesthetics, they all look basically the same. But the kind of people you encounter in them are interesting. Like, again, this is all a mood. Have you ever seen Nosferatu, the original, silent movie? I feel like this game captures a lot of the essence of the beginning of that movie, because that movie, which is, yes, it's Nosferatu, it was literally an actionable copyright violation of Dracula, but the beginning of that story, it all takes place in this like blighted landscape in Transylvania.
Sure.
And like it just feels like evil on the screen, right? When you watch that movie, like you can sense the evil presence, even this old silent movie. And I feel like the art direction of this game is, when you're just wandering through the woods or kind of the areas outside of town, it has a little bit of that feel.
I love the art in all the Castlevania games, and I think they're really good at setting, going with the music, setting that tone. And I mean, the colors, like Simon himself is black, white, and a little bit of red in the middle, and it's just like there's something stark about it. And yeah, like this kind of general malaise of evil. Obviously, at night, it's more evil, but even during the day, you get that sense like this is a cursed land.
It's incredible that they're able to convey that with the 8-bit limitations of the NES. Like, to get that tone across between that and the music, right? Like, and the first thing I think of is like when you're in town, right? These towns are not inviting in any way. They even when they are harmless, they appear menacing. Yeah. And the music, normally, in a video game, when you come into town, there's like a peaceful tune that plays, to let you know, like, oh, okay, like if it's a Final Fantasy game or a Zelda game, when you're in town, it's this jaunty, happy, peaceful thing. It's like, yeah, I'm coming in here into town to, I'm going to buy a new sword and a potion and everything's fine. And when the music that plays in town, which I believe is called something like the Silence of Daylight, it's like, it's not outright like hostile, but there's like a quiet menace to it.
Yeah, no, it's they and I think that's why these games have such staying power and have had so many iterations over the years, is because even compared to like a Ghouls and Ghosts, which was, I believe, Capcom's kind of response to this game, right? It's monsters and that kind of thing, a monster hunter. And those were good games, and I liked those. But there's something about this Castlevania that it felt like it was like, okay, this is the prototypical, like, old Universal monster movie kind of feel for a video game.
Yeah, Ghouls and Ghosts, or Ghosts and Goblins, any of that series, there's like a goofiness to them. Yeah. Which Castlevania goes for. I mean, there's a little goofiness. Like, sometimes you'll fight a Frankenstein in one of these games. Mm-hmm. There is, like you said, the universal horror. But generally, the types of things you encounter, there's not a lot of humor to them. The enemies are mostly they've almost got like a Ray Harryhausen feel to them, right? It's like, walking skeletons, werewolves, floating creepy eyeballs, bats. Like, none of it looks cute. And the NES was capable of rendering very cute enemies. These are not meant to look cute. They are meant to look menacing.
Yeah. Like, Mega Man was really good at cute enemies. Like, oh, these are gonna hurt me, but they're adorable, But this was a macabre. This was like goth. This was real goth.
Oh, it's absolutely like traditional Gothic, especially, like I said, in those towns, because that's the most plot and kind of flavor stuff you get for the most part, is talking to these people, and you get a sense of like how miserable their lives are, even though they say very little. What is there is very evocative, and there's lots of times you'll go into an open door, and there'll be no one there, and you have to use your holy water to bust open the floor and go down, and you go down a staircase, and then somewhere down there's a merchant or someone to talk to, and it's like, oh, what, this person is so afraid of what roams the land that he has basically boarded himself up in the basement. That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
And they're creepy. Even the people are mostly creepy looking. There's like those dudes in the cloaks. There's the guy with a huge shillelagh, like the stick, walking around. Yeah. There's that town that's like full of basically prostitutes.
Yeah. The boatman looks kind of scary. Yeah,
Oh, the boatman like creepily laughs at you.
Yeah.
He's like, I'll take you. He literally says, I'll take you somewhere safe. He. It's typed out.
Like, I don't know, boatman. I don't know.
There's nowhere safe to go in this game.
Yeah, except if you're trying to find bosses, because you're not going to find many.
Yeah, this game does not have many bosses. That is the weak point. Usually Castlevania bosses are kind of like a real showstopper. Here they kind of look visually cool. They're not fun to fight. They're not interesting to fight. There's like the creepy like floating black and white mask. That's probably
Yeah.
my favorite of the bunch.
Yeah. And then there's the Grim Reaper, and then there's Dracula.
That's it.
That's it. So some of these mansions, when you're done, you're like, oh, there's no boss. We're just done.
Yeah, I found the thing. Time to leave.
Yeah, which is, it feels like a real missed opportunity.
I mean, yeah. Again, the series is known for having a lot of these premier boss fights that are, if they're either really fun or they're at least a spectacle. And here you're not really getting that. But again, I think that's just not what this thing is about, right? It's that feeling of being just lost and confused. And you talk about like, well, I use Nintendo Power. They didn't give you everything. They gave you like, the first third, right?
Yeah.
They gave you a push out the door.
Yeah.
But this was in the days before the internet. So this was all about that like playground internet. Of like kids like, did you equip the thing and then go into the graveyard and do the, as they're trying to, decipher these misleading clues from the townsfolk and stuff. And sometimes the kids were right and sometimes the kids were very wrong.
Oh yeah, I remember very specifically because I didn't know there was some part of the game I couldn't remember or I didn't know how to do, and like my buddy's older brother had figured it out, and like that's how I found out stuff was. I forgot about back in the day how you would like share tips with your friends. That was fun.
I definitely remember conversations about that for like Zelda, where it was like you have to go burn this bush and it'll open up a thing, and you'd sit there with that candle and just burn every bush you could on every screen,
in the damn game,
hoping for something to happen. Yeah, this wasn't quite like that because it was more about these weird mysteries. I mean. There's one, I had to write this down. There's one villager that literally says, get a silk bag from the graveyard duck to live longer. All nonsense. And I thought, well, let's see if, maybe it made more sense in the original Japanese. Nope. That's what it says in Japanese too. Go find the graveyard duck to live longer. And I thought maybe even if it's like a grammar error, get a silk bag from the graveyard, comma, duck. To live longer.
Yeah.
Right. Verb duck. No, it's noun. It's the web-footed animal, and nonsense. You didn't know if it was nonsense or not. It could be anything. Some of the stuff in this game was, like I said, really obtuse.
Yeah, and I like your take on it about how like feeling lost and confused and whatnot. Which I get that. I did not get that at the time, so I didn't quite appreciate it as much. I just remember this game was like so frustrating in many ways. I loved it. But it was also like the kind of thing like you love to get mad at as well.
Yeah, this is why I felt this was this unique kind of group play experience, right? I'd play a little of it at a friend's house, and then I'd go play it at my house and try, can I do that? Or maybe I can get a little farther, and then I'll tell my friend about it, and the next time we'll both make more progress. There was this community of school kids, 8-year-olds trying to figure out their way past all of these mysteries, because if you actually know what you're doing, you can beat this game in 2.5 hours, putting your mind to it, but you have to know the exact right thing to do in every pathway of the game.
Sure. Yeah. But can we talk about the phenomena that was very interesting, that there was just kind of a large pattern to number 2 sequels in Nintendo, right? Like Super Mario Brothers 2 felt like a big departure from 1. This felt like a departure from the first Castlevania. Zelda 2 was different from Zelda 1. Things of that nature. It was like, it's like the video game companies said, let's experiment. Let's try something new, which is cool.
Yeah, although Super Mario Brothers 2 is a little bit of an outlier in that regard because it was never meant to be Super Mario Brothers 2. Do you know the story? Yeah. So the old story, so if you don't know, there was a game called Super Mario Brothers 2. It was released in Japan, and it was basically exactly like Super Mario Brothers 1, but harder, more of the same. And the Japanese thought, well, maybe the pansies in the U.S. aren't going to like it. So they took this game called Doki Doki Panic, and said there was a Japanese game, and they said, well, what if we swapped out the four main characters of this game and just made them Mario characters? And now it's Mario on this adventure, which is why the control scheme is totally different. There's almost none of that stuff ever shows up in any other Mario game. And when they went back to Super Mario Brothers 3, it's way more like 1 than it is 2. And Castlevania, same thing. Castlevania 3, way more like 1. And the next Zelda game, A Link to the Past, was a lot more like 1. So yeah, you're right. This is this weird like trilogy of like these oddball entries. But I kind of loved all of those games because it was like,
Same.
hey, let's try something new with this beloved character. We'll give you, because that almost never happens where a game company says we're going to make a sequel to this game, and usually it's like, how can we improve on what we did before? Not like, hey, we're going to take this character from this franchise and give you something that is a completely different set of verbs and actions for this game. Like Zelda 2, like you said, it's side scrolly most of the time. Zelda's usually, in the old school Zeldas, were top down.
Yeah.
So it's like you completely change the point of view from the character, the way you interact with the world, and now you've got a new thing. Simon's Quest doesn't change the way Simon Belmont moves. Like he moves and throws his whip out there pretty much like he does in the first game. But again, it's that structure they hit on, this labyrinth that became the Metroidvania, which is one of those popular genres now.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I agree with you. Like all three of those sequels that we just talked about, I liked all of them, and I still do like all of them. In fact, I'm one of those weirdos that actually likes Zelda 2 more than the first Zelda, which I know is sacrilege, but like I just did. And that's why Castlevania 2 will always kind of stick out, because when I remember 1 and 3, I get them swapped a lot just because they are kind of very similar in tone and whatnot. I know there's differences, but that's how but like this one always stands out as like very unique.
I appreciate that a lot more about this, and again, we talked about this, but it turned out to be very influential in that way. Like there's so many games now that owe a debt to Castlevania 2, not least of which was Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which was their kind of their big home run, which had this basic structure. You were running around a castle that was this long labyrinth of places you couldn't get to until you found the right tool for that area, and you could proceed. And that game was widely considered one of the best ever made, and that kind of catapulted the genre even further until you started seeing this in 3D. So, for example, like kind of one of the biggest games I think and most influential is Dark Souls. When you boot up Dark Souls, and after you get past the kind of the tutorial area, you're dumped into this hub, which is just sort of like the towns in Castlevania 2, right? It's this safe haven, where there's no enemies and respite, and you basically got two directions you can go in. And the game doesn't communicate, they literally tell you go this way instead of that way. What they do is one of those paths has extremely hard enemies, which is their way of nudging you, don't go this way. But if you do go that way, there are rewards to doing it. And in Simon's Quest, they don't quite go that far, because you will eventually, if you go that way, you're going to reach something impassable. Yeah. But, they want you to make that mistake. They want you to go down the wrong path, struggle for a while, and then, backtrack to where maybe you should be. That is a big part of like the pleasure of this game. It should be frustrating, but it's not, because it's meant to be, like I said, it's about setting that mood of like, ooh, okay, this place is dangerous, and I got to figure out where to go. Like it's the good kind of scared.
Yeah, and I think that that's why so many people are fans of those games that hold that kind of tension. I remember in an interview with Trey Parker, he was talking about him and Matt Stone play video games very differently. He's like, if Matt plays a video game and he goes over to some part to search for something and there's nothing there, he's like, God damn it, there's nothing here. What a waste of time. Whereas I go, ooh, there's nothing there. Like it's intriguing.
That is a less is more kind of lesson. And video games tend to not do that very often. It is kind of a maximalist pastime in a lot of ways. Call of Duty, shoot everything. I don't play games that way, but I love when they subvert my expectation. Now, sometimes, going through a long challenge and getting a shitty reward, that is a bad feeling. I'm like, oh, come on. You made me work my way past all of this stuff, and this is all I find there is nothing. But a better example of this is in going to Simon's Quest is when you finally get to Dracula's castle to burn the body parts and bring it back to life. In the original game, Dracula's castle is naturally the final level of the game. As you work your way through it, multiple levels of it, and it gets harder and harder as you go, filled with the most difficult enemies, the hardest jumps to make, and all of the challenges ramped up to 11, right? Sure. Here, when you get to the castle, it's empty. It's
Yeah.
just a walk from the door down some stairs and through, until you get to this altar, right? What a brilliant choice. I love that. It's so understated and it's so counter, to your expectations. It was just great. Like it made it feel more tense because you're just waiting for something to happen.
Hearing you appreciate this game gives me a new appreciation for it, I think.
I spent a lot of time listening to game podcasts. In fact, if you like them, I would recommend Watch Out for Fireballs, which our guest Cole Ross, who was on the Mist episode, that's his show, and it is a delight. Also, Dave Jackson, who was on our Pokemon episode, hosts a great show called Tales from the Backlog. So, but getting back to this, like I think that's where I get a lot of my, kind of the lingual framework to like how do I describe this thing in a game. But yeah, so to connect that again to like Dark Souls, one of the interesting things about that game is when you finally get to the last boss, he's sort of a pushover. And it's like, oh, it's this anticlimax, right? And instead of it being this like, Carmina Burana type music starts and you're gonna, fight the biggest monster in the world, it's this like kind of sad piano music as you take down this, what was once this powerful being and is now, and it says a lot about the state that he's in, and like there's this emotional resonance to that moment, and very few games will take that risk. And Simon's Quest, again with that castle walk that is just barren, and then the Dracula fight itself is not particularly hard,
especially if you know which weapon to use.
Yes, if you break the game by using that dagger on him, he's going nowhere.
Or the holy water, or the flame. I mean, there's ways to like bake it to where like he doesn't even get a punch in.
Yeah, I never really had much trouble with him at all because I don't think that's the point, right? It's not, sometimes it's triumphant to give you this chance to feel like, yeah, I wiped the floor with this thing, right? It's not, that's not the climax. The climax is making your way to this point, not the actual fight that's inside.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall fun game. I think we got to talk about the three endings.
Yes.
Real quick, which is two bad, one good. Basically.
Again, based on how long it took you to complete the quest.
Yeah. So if you take if you go over a certain amount of time, the longest, like you both died. Like Dracula dies and you die.
Right. You died from your wounds.
Yep.
That's part of the curse. I think maybe it's in the manual somewhere, because sometimes these games would put part of their story in the manual so you won't see it on screen. But it was like the idea is that Simon's wounds from his original battle with Dracula won't heal. That's part of the curse, which is, again, very Linkin Park and very metal in general. These weeping, gashes on him or whatever. But yes, as you said, they both are slain, or he kills Dracula and then he succumbs to the curse.
Well, that's the second ending, right? The second ending is Dracula's dead, but Simon lives, but then he dies from the curse, right?
Right.
And then the best ending is Dracula dies, but then Simon actually lives.
And then I believe that's also the ending, though, where after he walks away from the grave, it turns to night and we see, Dracula's hand burst out of the ground, which is cool. Which does not set up the third one, because the third one is actually a prequel.
Yes. Yeah.
And it involves like his ancestor 100 years before these games.
Yeah, the story, because it's not Simon.
Yeah, which is great. And Castlevania is great. 3 is really wonderful. I remember putting tons of time into that one. It's extremely hard.
Yeah, it is.
But this game is kind of special because I can't think of any other NES games that kind of did what this thing did with tone. And that's its real secret sauce, right? The combat, the walking around is, it's fine. Again, not terribly challenging, especially with how forgiving the deaths are. But one of the things I love about video games that other mediums can't do as well, right? It's like, what's unique to games? Games are able to make you feel things based on your actions. Right, and the world they put you in. It's one thing to watch a movie and see someone confront a monster and run away. It's another to feel like, okay, I have to do it. right? I'm in the room with this thing and I have to kill it and it's trying to kill me. And this story won't progress until I do, right? Movies and TV or books, they're totally passive. There is no obstacle. You're just going to keep watching and it's just going to unfold. Here it's like, no. It's the only medium that fights back at you. To do that. But it's not just things like, terror in the face of combat. Like games are able to do all sorts of things with environmental storytelling and music and mood in ways that movies, TV, and books and other mediums cannot.
Absolutely. And like you said earlier, hats off to this game, particularly for being able to set the horror motif so well, with 8 bits of data.
Yeah, the NES is so limited in terms of its technical capabilities, but that's why I think this game is really unique, because most NES games didn't even go for much in the way of tone. Usually the tone was, cartoons are jumping.
Yeah.
And so to even try anything approaching this, the ones I can think of are maybe things like Shadowgate and Deja Vu, these like point and click type games. But
I'd say
rare.
Ninja Gaiden did a good job of it with the theatrical, what were the scenes, the cutscenes, yeah.
Which for non-video game folks, that's like basically where the gameplay stops and they show you a little movie for a minute to tell the story, and then the gameplay resumes.
Yeah.
Ninja Gaiden was a pioneer in doing that. You're right; those games they do a very good job of setting tone and environmental storytelling, kind of the way this does. Just the art design tells you a lot about the world. But again, this particular mood that this game sets is very unique, and I don't think we saw anything much like this again until maybe even like the 2000s, when or at least the late 90s, when you get things like Silent Hill.
Yeah, things of that nature. I'd say even like Halo, which wasn't the same, but when the zombie part of Halo does kind of set that zombie mood, similar but different.
Yeah, I think my favorite parts of games lately are not the loud parts, but the quiet parts, where a game has kind of the confidence to go, hey, we're going to have you stop shooting, running, jumping, whatever the verbs are of the game, and maybe something different is going to happen that's quiet. So like a good example of this I love is in the third Uncharted game. A lot of that's basically like Indiana Jones style, whiz bang action, archaeology stuff. And you go through this whole thing where you're on a plane that crashes. It's very exciting. The plane crashes in the middle of the desert. And then the game says, you know what? We're going to have no combat for a while. We're just going to have a chapter of this game that's you walking in the desert, experiencing some mirages and hallucinations and stuff. And it's all just character building and story. And, that you look at like the success of a show like The Last of Us, right? That game lives, yes, the combat is cool and fun and it's neat to outwit people and infected monsters, but that the writing, the acting, and again those quiet moments where the characters are just walking through an area and talking to each other, that's when I get the most interested, which is like, oh, okay, they're gonna let this happen. They're gonna trust that I'm not gonna lose interest simply because I'm not jumping, running, shooting, it's okay. We'll get back to that in a minute. You're going to trust me, the player, to sit back and enjoy, what else you can do.
And both those games that you mentioned, the Uncharted series and
The Last of Us,
and The Last of Us, like they're both extremely well told stories, right? You care about the characters, you care about the stories, great storytelling, and so when you have those quiet moments, it does matter to you because you care about this character. And what's even more impressive about Castlevania 2 is that, it couldn't tell you a story as much because it didn't have as much text, or it certainly didn't have voices. But you hit the nail on the head when you said the tone. The tone brings you into the world so much that it tells this story through how it sounds and how it looks.
Yeah, that's the miracle of this thing. And I think that's why people are still talking about it, because like this was, if you've ever heard of like the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Yeah, I watched it.
These guys do these YouTube videos where they just, crap on bad games, which is funny and fine. This was his first video.
I rewatched it. He made that video in 2005. When YouTube literally came out.
Yeah, and people will crap on this game, and there's plenty of things to criticize about it,
Sure.
right? It's far from perfect, especially with how obtuse it is. But I think the things it gets right are why the thing has such a kind of a long tail and a legacy, despite
Absolutely.
all of those flaws.
And there were plenty of games that didn't make it past the second sequel. The fact that Castlevania is, still talked about as one of the great game franchises, it could have died with this game if this game wasn't memorable. A third one wasn't guaranteed.
And again, that when they eventually did Symphony of the Night, which I believe is 97, that was this huge runaway success for them, and still very much talked about as like one of the best examples of this genre. And it was because they went back to this formula that they had previously thought, well, this wasn't as well received, we'll go back to doing what we normally do. That got stale. This didn't, right?
Yeah.
I think there's something about that Metroidvania structure that is really appealing. In fact, a lot of indie games, it's like, oh, it's another Metroidvania again. It's I think easier for small studios to make these, and there's a lot of great ones out there. I highly recommend Hollow Knight. If you have a chance to play that, go immediately and go play that. It's phenomenal. If you want something that feels more like this, go get Infernax, which is a throwback. It's 8-bit style. It's like, what if someone made Simon's Quest and Zelda 2 but fixed all of the things that were bad about those games?
Oh, wow.
And made it really funny. Like, immediately go pick that up. It's such an easy recommendation. Go get that game. But again, it's like that victory in terms of, like we said, tone, structure. It set this thing apart. And you look at all of these successful things that have come since, and it's like, man, how many of these designers must have grown up butting their heads up against Simon's Quest?
Absolutely, yeah. No, this was one of the great influencer games for the next generation of game makers, 100%.
Yeah. Anything else we want to say about Simon's Quest? I think we've kind of covered it. This might be a short episode.
One other random thing I want to throw in there is that Simon Belmont was always my favorite Belmont just because of Captain N, the game master.
Oh, yes, we have to talk about Captain N. I did watch a little clip of that. So Captain N, and this might be worth its own episode someday, but basically it was this kid who's sucked into video game world and Nintendo world, basically, and all of his allies are... It's like Mega Man and Simon Belmont, and I think Link from Legend of Zelda. A couple of these like marquee video game characters go up against Mother Brain, who is the bad guy from Metroid, and she has a couple of other henchmen from other franchises.
Eggplant Wizard and
from Kid Icarus. Yeah.
Yep.
And so Simon Belmont is in the mix, although his character is very different from the tone we get in this game. He's this like, go ahead.
Yeah, he's like bumbling, he's like that. He looks like the part of an adventure, but he's often, kind of cowardly and bumbling and that kind of thing.
Yeah, his design looks like what if Launchpad McQuack was a human instead of a duck?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, but he's very he's super vain and just like inept. It's, he projects the idea of a hero, and that's kind of the satire of it, of course, that he's not.
Your kingship, I humbly accept the gifts you have come to bestow upon my heroic head.
Imposter! Fraud! Thief!
No, it's me, Simon Belmont, vampire hunter. See?
I see the grandson of a coward who stole the glory after I defeated the vampire count.
Oh.
There must be some mistake, Your Highness.
The mistake was made by the House of Belmont. I curse them with 1,000 years of shame.
Do you think anyone heard what he said?
Yeah, I can't. I was trying to find if there was anything in there in Captain N that directly referenced Simon. I did find some stuff that referenced Castlevania 3, but I couldn't find any stuff that. Yeah, like there's an episode where like Alucard, Dracula's son, shows up. There's a couple of things from Castlevania 3 in it, but I didn't remember seeing anything from 2.
I don't remember any specifics either.
It had to be in there though, because that thing was purely marketing. That's all it was.
Well, every cartoon in the 80s was purely marketing.
Yeah, no question. Although I don't remember them selling a lot of like Captain N like action figures and stuff. It was just like
if
maybe
they did, they didn't come to
my.
I never saw them. Yeah, but I mean, I guess their thing was just bringing more awareness to Nintendo.
Yeah, well, they didn't need much help in that department because for a long time they had no competition of any notoriety until Sega kind of started nipping at their heels a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
And now Nintendo owns them. So you drank their milkshake. Yeah. Gosh, anything else you want to say about Simon's Quest before we kind of bring this to a close? I mean, we sort of talked about it a lot, but why do you think that people are still talking about Simon's Quest in 2023?
I mean, I think it's back to that. It was just it was standout, so different. They took a big risk with this game, and where there were a lot of parts to it that frustrated a lot of people, that the things that stayed, as you said, really influenced a lot of game makers and influenced obviously the Castlevania series at that point, and a whole new genre of game. And you remember it, right? Like, I played a lot, and we both played a lot of games as kids, and a lot of them kind of meld together because they're all side-scrolling, shoot the bad guy kind of thing. And this game stood out as unique.
I think this game has stood the test of time despite its flaws because of its unique design. It's sort of, as we said, it's victory in terms of being able to convey a tone without much text and only through sort of environment and mood. And, I just keep going back to, I mean, I'm a lifelong gamer. I love talking about games. I'd love to do more games on this show. And every time I sit down to play a new game, I'm so often reminded of this one. There's so often that I'll see an echo of something from Simon's Quest in something modern and think this wouldn't exist without some influence from this old game. And I pair that with kind of these happy childhood memories of playing it, of being lost and flummoxed and not knowing what to do, and discovering these counterintuitive solutions, either myself or finding out from a friend's brother that felt like breaking into Fort Knox to find these secrets and know what to do. I think that's a high that a lot of my video game time has been spent chasing. I think the games I love the most are the ones that replicate that emotion, that feeling of discovery, that feeling of walking into a dark forest and not knowing what's going to be there. So yeah, I think that's what's kept Simon's Quest alive all these years later.
Love it.
So Rich, if people want to find you, where will they find you?
You can see anytime I have a performance or a class or a workshop or anything like that. I always put it on my social media at Rich Baker Coaching, or you can get links to all that at www.richbakercoaching.com. And
of course, if you like us, get a silk bag from the graveyard. If you like us, please drop us a review. If you haven't done that already, and if you've been enjoying the show, go ahead and do it. It helps people find out about the show, and of course, word of mouth would be great. Just tell your friends, this is going on, and it might be something they like. Especially, we've covered a whole range of different topics now. So if this one's not your cup of tea, maybe the other one is, or leave us a review on iTunes or Podcast Addict or wherever you happen to find it. If you have feedback, tweet it to us at NostalgiumPod or find us on Instagram. And please follow us there because I do post bonus stuff over there from time to time. So, and this episode was, again, we called them all audible. So in terms of what's next, things are a little out of order, but you just heard Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Superman before that. Coming up next, I believe, if I've done my math right, is our special on Jurassic Park, where you'll hear Rich again and us celebrate the 30th anniversary of that film. And then coming up after that, in an order I'm not entirely sure of, we're planning on doing an episode on Rocky IV. We're planning on doing another musical episode about our favorite Disney songs. We still got that Terminator 2 episode locked and loaded. Working on one on the Far Side. Really neat stuff. So,
nice.
Yeah. So cool stuff, as always, in the future for the show. So I really appreciate it. Rich, thanks again for coming on. We always love that.
Always a pleasure, Doug. Thanks for having me.
All right. And until the morning sun vanquishes the horrible night, this has been one more entry in the Nostalgium Arcana.
You left him for dead in Konami's Castlevania. How foolish to presume he'd perish without leaving a curse. For now, in Simon's quest for Nintendo, fate stalks your very being, and you need more than clues from cowardly villagers to survive when day turns into night. But just keep telling yourself it's only a video game. It's only a...
Huh?